If you're new here, we are a group of everyday Montanans that have been building a legacy of fighting for Montana for over 50 years. We're hosting this webinar series as a service to our members and supporters because we believe that everyone should have a voice in designing their legacy. If you're comfortable, please feel free to turn on your cameras so we can have a more conversational setting here. Now, before we begin, I'm going to briefly review our agenda. First, Mary Jo Knights will share her family story. Then Dr. Marsha Goetting, an MSU professor and MSU Extension Family Economics Specialist, will spend some time teaching us about the ins and outs of will planning in Montana. We will conclude with a brief Q&A session at the end. You can type questions in the chat as we go, or raise your hand virtually or physically when we start the Q&A. And now Mary Jo Knights will share her family story.
Thank you so much. Both of my parents grew up in Phillipsburg in western part of Montana. My father's family had a small business and my mother's family had a small cattle ranch. I too was born in Phillipsburg while my father was going to school in Bozeman and spending the summers working for the Forest Service in the Pintler National Forest. The family story is that I was conceived in the Forest Service fire lookout where my parents lived the first summer after they got married. I've always kind of liked that story. My dad got a job teaching science in the high school in Laurel, and we moved there in 1956. Our family came to love the Beartooths, and my dad often referred to that area as his backyard. He was an avid photographer, and the walls of our house in Laurel were filled with the photos he took in his many hikes and backpacking trips. I left Montana to go to college in 1969, returning every summer for a family backpacking trip. My father loved Montana, and he was always pleased that we came home for this wilderness experience. As a person with training in science, he was mindful of the fragility of the ecosystem, and we children were the frequent recipients of many lectures about ecology. I remember from the time I was a small child that my father was always concerned about the extractive industries in our state and the impact they have on the environment. We had family in Anaconda and Butte and witnessed the damage from the mining there on our visits to our relatives, the drama of the Berkeley pit, we always stopped to view it, and the barrenness of the area around the smelter in Anaconda. I don't know exactly when my father became a Northern Plains supporter. I do remember him opposing the strip mining in Colstrip, and I'm guessing that he got involved around that issue. He felt very strongly about environmental issues, and he contributed to other environmental organizations as well. He lived frugally, he opposed waste. He was the kind of guy who always picked up trash on his daily walks. When the time came for him to think about estate planning, he and my mother had divorced, and the three of us kids were pretty well launched. He made arrangements for his burial so we would not have to do that, and he wanted to have his estate settled. He believed that the most important thing he could leave for his grandchildren was a planet where the interests of capitalism did not dominate over the protection of life on the planet. Okay, so capitalism is probably more my language than his, but that was the sentiment. When he first talked about leaving his assets to environmental organizations, it seemed like a conversation about something very distant, almost abstract. I suspect this is an experience a lot of families have with estate planning. It seems like, oh, that's a long time from now. While a little unusual, it didn't seem out of character for my father. He did share his plans with his brother, and his brother was very strongly opposed to the course of action that my father described. I know that was quite upsetting for my father. In fact, he put his plans on hold for a while, but he did not change his mind. I got a job offer from the University of Missouri, and I moved to Missouri in 1980. My dad kept me informed about political battles in Montana, who he was voting for, and some of the controversies about environmental issues. He also talked to my sister and me about his donations, so we knew about his support for Northern Plains, and I think both of us started to kind of follow this organization from our distant homes, hers in Colorado and mine in Missouri. Occasionally, we made small contributions ourselves. We had many conversations with him about how to distribute his resources among several environmental organizations. My sister and I both felt very strongly that the largest share should go to Northern Plains. We liked that it was a grassroots organization with a solid history of activism, yet it is not so small that its viability as an organization was uncertain. I'm assuming that's the case. Yet it is not, on the other hand, because it was not a huge national organization, a gift could make a difference. And Northern Plains, of course, worked in our beloved Montana. Since 1980, I've lived in Missouri. Columbia, the location of the University of Missouri where I work, is a college town. It's about the size of Billings. I live in the county, it's Boone County, with 3 state parks and 2 conservation areas within a few miles. My home backs onto a hardwood forest. Imprinted at an early age with the big skies of Montana, it can still feel a little foreign to me. From my deck, I face a wall of green, almost a jungle. I am about 4 miles from the Missouri River, the Big Muddy, as they call it here. When I moved here, I was comforted by the presence of the Lewis and Clark signs, the same ones that I grew up with on the Yellowstone River. I sometimes stand on the banks of the Missouri and I wonder about this water in this river that begins in Montana with the Yellowstone flowing into it to this spot where I live now. I still feel a deep connection to Montana. The Missouri River reminds me of that connection and the importance of this watershed for the well-being of so many people, plants, animals, and the earth itself. What happens in Colstrip matters now, not only for the people there, but also for all of us downstream. I and my siblings subscribe to Montana Outdoors and High Country News. We want to know about the issues that are affecting the West today. Like my father, I want to stand with organizations that share my values and work on issues that are important to me. The conversations I had with my father reverberate in my own life. I am now at the time of my life when I'm thinking about my own resources and where I would like them to go when I am no longer here. I am also choosing to make Northern Plains a beneficiary in my estate. When I told my sister and my nieces and nephews about this plan, it was not a surprise for anyone. So thank you very much for the work that you do.
You're on mute.
Sorry. I want to thank Mary Jo for that story about your family and your own embracing of preparing your estate and including Northern Plains and that. Now we're going to hear from Marsha Goetting from MSU Extension. So please feel free to enter your questions as we go along in the chat, and we will answer these during the Q&A section. You will also be able to raise your hand and ask the question directly.
Okay, sounds like we're ready to go and I'm ready to go. So let's make sure everything works like it's supposed to. Okay, well, there's me, and you can see a photo of me as well. But my role through MSU Extension is to provide education, take the university to the people. And so I work with the county extension agents that are scattered across Montana. And I'm already getting scheduled for January to do programs in Kalispell. So people learn to schedule ahead. Now, when I do a webinar, I like to do engagement tools. The reason is I found that if I wasn't careful, I could be the most boring person in the room when it came to trying to do a webinar. So I came up with some ideas that we'll see if you like them or not. And one thing is I like to ask questions. And normally, if I'm doing a live program, I ask the questions and they use what is called a response clicker. And that way I show it on the screen and people know, oh, I'm as smart as everybody else, or, oh dear, we all miss that question. So as we look at legacy planning, one of the things that you'll discover is that it's way beyond writing a will in this day and age. A is the written will, but all of these other things, the POD, the TOD, and the TODD, all of those are ways that you avoid probate. And people are taking advantage of those. And maybe I could do another program for you at another time to talk some more about details of those. But here's my little, I hope, attractive item, and that has to be wildflowers. I love wildflowers. And you know what? They can tell a story. And so I'm using wildflower names as reminders in the program this evening. And they're really designed to help you remember some of the key points about having a will. The other thing here is our pine drops. Now you'll notice that that's a question mark, and yet I really saw it. I didn't bend it like that. But as Mary said, put your questions in the chat box. Now here we have a steer's head. I just loved the opportunity to have people try to guess, but you know, I got a short amount of time tonight, so I'm not going to let you guess. I'm telling you, it's a steer's head. So what that means is I want to steer you to what happens to your property if you die without a will. I want to steer you to what you can and can't do with a will. And so here's our first example. We've got Montana bitterroots, and they're a state flower. Well, of course, that reminds me of the bitterroot family and the bitterness that can result from lack of planning. Because you see, if you don't plan, Montana law steps in and says, this is where your property is going to go. Now, that's not a legacy. You want to develop your own legacy. So let's look at this bitterroot family. We got husband and wife. We have 3 children who get married, and then they bless, and we've got grandma and grandpa now. And this was a very happy family at one point in time. But you know, life happens to all of us, and it happened to them as well. In 1999, there was a son that was killed in a plane crash. In the year 2005, we had a daughter that passed away as a result of a car accident. Well, then in 2008, the husband died of a heart attack. So the person that survives is mom. And you see, because there was no planning, no will, mom is in control of everything. In other words, all the property is in mom's name. Well, what we want to do then is take a look at that family situation and see what grandchild D would receive, if anything. So you don't have to turn on your mic and embarrass yourself. I want you to just think about this yourself, come up with the answer, and then I'll let you know what it really is. So what fraction, if any, does the grandchild D receive? 0, a 1/6, an 1/8, or a 9. Now, most of my audiences think 0, and that's incorrect. Because what this grandchild is going to receive is a 9th. And you're out there saying, what? Well, the reason is Montana distributes property by right of representation. Now, exactly what does that mean? Well, when I was having my will written and the attorney told me, you know, talk, and I'm going, you know, deer in the headlights, I didn't get it. I had him draw it out with my specific family situation, and ta-da, I got it. So let's look and see how that works. How many kids did mom and dad have? 3, right? We've got 2 that are deceased. We have 1 that's living. So by representation, I think of it this way. Here's the turquoise kid that has a 3rd. Okay, the reason that kid has a 3rd is that's what his dad would have received had the dad lived. Okay, now we've got another son over here that is a survivor, and he receives a 3rd. And then over here, we've got the 3 grandchildren that receive a 9th, because a 1/3 of a 1/3 is a 9th. Now, if you're the pink grandchildren, what do you feel about that? You're thinking, well, why didn't grandma recognize us? You know, doesn't she love us as much as she loved them? Well, that doesn't have anything to do with it. Mom didn't plan. Grandma just did not do any legacy planning in her situation. So that is right of representation. Now, some of you out there, I bet, are going, Ho hum, when's she going to get to the will part? Because you already have a will. Okay, I want you to pull that will out. Don't put any scratches on it. No, no, no. I want you to see how the attorney wrote in the will. Did he or she use right of representation to indicate how your property was going to be distributed? And this is the way it is. If there's any child that predeceases you, it goes to their children. Okay? So I'm really trying to tell you why dying without a will is not the way to go. Haha. Well, my audiences that are live, try to laugh at that one just to make me feel better. So Grandma Bitterroot could have wrote a will, and it could have been a reflection of her values. And guess what? She is going to leave all of her assets to her favorite nonprofit. And guess who it is? The Northern Plains Resource Council. I wonder why I included that. Okay, now here we have two pink monkey flowers. And what they make me think about is joint tenancy and married couples. Okay, so let's look at the consequences. We're going to look at a young family. They've got their property in joint tenancy with right of survivorship. And at this point, they don't have children. And the title, the way we know it's a joint tenancy, is it reads John Doe and Mary Doe as joint tenants with right of survivorship and not as tenants in common. That's the way a title should read if it's going to be a joint tenancy. So I'm working with Tim and Sharon, and I'm trying to get them to write a will. And neither one of them are buying into that. They're saying, we don't have kids. We don't need a will. We don't even have an estate. Well, come on, you do too. If you have $1,000 in your checking account, you have an estate. So we're going to look at them and we're going to discover, they've been in a car accident. Tim died immediately and Sharon survives until the 6th day. So the question then becomes, who is going to receive the property if Tim dies first and Sharon dies on the 3rd day? So I've given you some choices. It could be Tim's parents. It could be Sharon's parents. It could be 1/2 to each set of parents, or the state of Montana, because they don't have children. So you can even write it down on a piece of paper. Which answer do you think is right? Well, guess what? It's going to go half and half. And some of you are out there saying, I knew it, that's it. And others are saying, huh? Well, if you're saying, huh, you were like I was until I discovered that there's a law in Montana. And it says if neither joint tenant survives by 120 hours, which is 5 days, then that joint tenancy property is going to be split half and half. Now, is that what this young couple really wants to have happen when John's folks gave them a farm upon their marriage? Now, I'm sure Sharon's parents would refuse it and give it back to Tim's ferret. Okay, we need to do some more. So Tim and Sharon looked at me and they said, half and half, that sounds good to me. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get you, Tim. Here's the deal. What if you die first and Sharon dies on the 6th day? Now whose relatives receive that property? Sharon's. You see, she met that 5-day survival requirement, 120 hours, and therefore it's her parents that receive it all. Now, all it took was this example to get them to realize why they needed to write a will. And I said, suppose Tim is the one that dies on the 6th day. So the reality is you die without a will, we've got 3 things that could happen. All to Tim's folks, all to Mary's folks, or half and half. So you need to get that will written. And by the way, if Tim does write the will and he says, I leave my share of joint tenancy property to my parents. Not gonna work. That part of the will be invalid because you can't use a will to undo the joint tenancy with right of survivorship. So keep that in mind. Tell that to your adult married kids. Now, I think then a reflection from or a tip from our pink monkey flowers is that married couples do need to be aware of the impact of the 120-hour survivor requirement for joint tenancy property. Now, this one is not probably the most beautiful one you've ever seen. It's called a rock live forever that I took in California, but it's perfect to think about writing a will, because we are not going to live forever and we can't take it with us. So we all know a will. Hey, it's a document that describes what you want to have happen with your property after you die. And Montana doesn't have very many requirements, but one is you must be age 18 or older. So if you look at all the people that are here, I think we all qualify. The next one is you must be of sound mind, which is described as knowing the nature of your property and know those to whom you would leave your property. Okay, I'm going to say you're all of sound mind. And that sound mind business is important because here's your dad's will. That's what the attorney is saying. And dad is saying, being of sound mind, I spin it all. Okay, so my tip from the rock live forever is remember, nobody does live forever, and you need to write the will before it's too late. Now here we have some baneberry flowers, and I saw some of those today when I was jogging. I couldn't believe they're out already. And these are baneberry berries. Well, have you heard this phrase? So-and-so is the bane of my existence. Did any of you ever say that about your mom or dad? Well, I think I probably did at least once. But here is William Shakespeare's will. And he says, my only son, Hamlet, is not to receive a single penny from my estate for reasons well known to him and my family and friends. And for the further reason, since he attained majority, he has been disobedient, ungrateful, and a constant source of humiliation, anxiety, and sorrow. In other words, he's been the bane of my existence. Now, true, that wasn't Shakespeare's will, but it was a mom's will that was actually submitted for probate. So what can you do with a will? Very simply, you can divide assets equally. So if you got 3 kids, you do a third, a third, and a third. Now, you can also divide assets unequally with a will. And here is a mom, and what she did was leave everything to her daughter. Now, why do you think she left everything to the daughter? Well, I have people say, oh, she was the favorite and la-di-da-di. Well, you know, there's a good reason here. Because she has provided me with care that has allowed me to stay in my home and not have to move into a nursing home. So sure, why not recognize the contributions that your children have provided? Now, do you have to leave each kid $1 just so you show you know the objects of your bounty? Nah, not in this day and age. You just say, I recognize that I have 3 children, Maddie, Eric, and Melina. And then you say, Maddie and Melina have already received monetary gifts. So you help them buy a house. You help them get started in a business so they do not take any property under this will. And if you're going to disinherit somebody, you do the same thing. I recognize I have 3 children, Maddie, Eric, and Melina. Maddie and Melina do not receive anything under this will. That takes care of it. You don't have to give all the reasons why. Now, the other thing you can do with a will is skip a generation. We have grandma here, and we saw her earlier, and what she could have decided to do is just leave it equally to all the grandchildren. So that would result in 1/6 each. You can also disinherit heirs, as I mentioned, and you don't have to leave equal amounts to all grandchildren. Here we've got some, 1 receives a half, a fourth, and then we've got 3 with 0. And when I asked, why do you think grandma left that a half to that one granddaughter? Well, we have people that respond, oh, she was the favorite. Well, no, she was the one that took time to see grandma. She wrote grandma birthday cards. She wrote in handwriting, not email, notes to granny. And grandma decided that's what she wanted to do. And it's her money. She can do with what she wants. Now, here's one dad's will. He said, to my son, I leave the pleasure of earning a living. For 25 years, he thought the pleasure was mine. Boy, was he mistaken. Another real will. Now, does a will have to pass through probate to be declared valid? So we're going to try something here. If you think the answer is yes, you're going to raise your hand. Or you have a hand in there that you can do, but I don't raise your hand. Okay, so if it's yes, raise your hand. If it's no, raise your hand. Now, excuse me, but I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, be stubborn. What I'm going to do is say, guess what? It does. You see, once you get your will written, it's really great, but it doesn't have any validity until it goes through the probate process. Now, that's unless all property is non-probate. So if you had PODs, payable on death, transfer on death, another transfer on death deed, you may have a will, but it may not even be submitted for probate because there's no property there for the will to control. Now, you can change a will, of course. You can revoke it. You can add a codicil. That means we just go in and change one paragraph, or you can make an entirely new will. And with the software programs we have in this day and age, writing an entirely new one is a good idea because I find people are not updating their wills. They're 20 years old, 10 years old, and the kids are grown up. So it's time to update. Now, another thing you do with your will is you nominate a personal representative. Now, that's the executor, but we call it personal representative in Montana. That can be your spouse, an adult child, a friend, just someone that you trust. That's who you want to be your PR. And you parents out there with minor children, I'm going to get on my soapbox and say, you need to nominate a guardian and a conservator for your kids. They're young. Who is going to take over and manage the money? That's the conservator. Who is going to take care of the kid and, have the kid live with them? That's the guardian. So you need to do some serious thinking about that. Now, we've got John in his will, and he leaves $150,000 in his estate to his wife, Anne, but they're divorced. Uh-oh. He's leaving her $150,000. So we need to take a look at this and say, under Montana law, who's going to get the $150,000? Is it Anne, his former wife, or Sarah, his present wife, John and Anne's 3 children, or John's parents? Now, that would be a good one, and we could do the hand thing, but you guys aren't interested in that. So put it in your mind, and then ta-da! Anne doesn't inherit. Sarah does not inherit. It's John's kids that receive 1/3 each. And you're saying, well, why? Well, the why is in Montana, a divorce revokes a bequest to a former spouse. They passed a statute like that. And that means then it goes further down and it's John and Anne's kids that receive that $150,000. Now, sometimes we have divorces that are amiable. Okay, if you write the will after the divorce decree, then it would be accepted. So in other words, if John had waited and then wrote the will, wanting to, they were still friends, and he wanted her to have that $150,000, then it would work. But if you know somebody out there that's just separated, It is not considered as a divorce under the Uniform Probate Code. So any bequests that you make to a spouse, like this lady that I had at one of my meetings, they had been separated for 20 years. And she said, the attorney told me he won't get anything. And I said, I'm sorry, but you need to check with a new attorney, because indeed he would receive property. So she needs to decide whether to keep being separated or, I guess, get a marriage dissolution. Now here's Heine. Heine made his wife the sole beneficiary on the condition that she remarry, because then there will be at least one man to regret my death. Yes, this was a real will as well. So I want you to write a will to assure that your wishes are honored and you won't be the bane of someone's existence. Now here we have some white mule's ears. Have you heard the phrase, mom or dad is stubborn as a mule? Yeah, okay. Let's see if that's really true. Here we have a dad and he's got 2 kids and the property's all in dad's name. And the 2 kids are trying to get dad to do some estate planning. You know, they've been to one of my meetings. And dad says, now come on, if you think I'm going to pay an attorney $1,000 to write a will, you're wrong, because the state of Montana, when I die, is going to leave it equally to you. So why should I write a will? Well, they're concerned. The kids are concerned that dad is going to marry a wow floozy from Billings. His wife died 10 years ago and he's ready to date again. Well, dad did remarry. He did put the property in joint tenancy with right of survivorship, but he informs his kids, don't worry, I've written a will and it's dated after the joint tenancy was formed. You 2 will get the ranch. Okay, so of course I have dad the mule dying. Well, dad's kids get the ranch. And I hope all of you out there are shouting, no. Why? It's in joint tenancy. The will cannot undo a joint tenancy. And it doesn't matter if it was written before the joint tenancy was formed or after the joint tenancy was formed. You can't undo a contract with a will. Now, let's say mom dies now. Well, not the mom, but the new wife. And we've discovered she's got kids. Well, she dies, the kids get it all. His 2 kids, nothing. They're not happy. But another thing could have happened. What if the surviving spouse marries the good-looking hunk from Missoula? And then the property is placed in joint tenancy with the hunk. We got the same thing happening. She dies. It all goes up to the husband because of that joint tenancy. His kids don't inherit, her kids don't inherit, and you've got a bunch of unhappy people. So joint tenancy with right of survivorship may not be the best choice if you really want to make sure that you provide for your children from a prior marriage. Now here we have a heart-leafed arnica. And I got Joe Hart and Brooke Hart, and they're doing heart-to-heart estate planning. Now, Joe has heartfelt intentions. He has a $100,000 life insurance policy, and he's designated Brooke, his sweetheart, as his beneficiary. And then he writes a will. He changes his mind, and he says, I bequest all my life insurance proceeds to my son, Eric Hart. This is my test question. Am I a good teacher? Because I'm saying, who gets the $100,000? And I am sure that all of you are going to make me feel good by thinking Brooke. And sure enough, it is indeed Brooke, because she's the designated beneficiary. That form is a contract. So what should Joe do if he wants to change beneficiaries? Fill out a new form, send it to the life insurance company. And many of those are now online as well. Now, we're not going to do this because I don't want to embarrass, I can't sing either, but I have my live audiences sing this, that you can't undo a beneficiary designation with a will. And I bet some of you are out there know about the bouncing ball and singing? Well, for the younger generation, it was Mitch. Okay. So have a heart, review your beneficiary designations. Let's get those updated, because you could have a POD on your savings, your checking, certificates of deposit, and United States savings bonds. Now, here is a pink owl's clover. Now, I love this flower. Took it in Glacier Park, and if you can imagine, 4 umbrellas and 1 wind box. The wind was blowing us away. It turned out, I was so happy. So what that reminds me of is you can have a separate listing of tangible personal property with your will. When you're doing wills now, the attorney puts a paragraph in there that says, I have a separate listing. And that's for the things that have emotional value in the family. You know, grandma's ring, some antiques, some silver dollars that happen to be in the safe deposit box. See, this is anything that has emotional value. Who cares about the dirty sofa? So I have a separate listing that's in the will. And then you describe the item, and then you name the person that you want to receive that and the relationship. That makes it very clear who is to receive the item. My niece, Bethany. So separate listing. So you can take advantage of the separate listing of tangible personal property. These are items without a title. Okay. Well, my observation from the lady slipper is it's about time for me to wrap it up, because I want to make sure you have your beauty and I can answer questions. So I hope I did steer you to what happens to your property when you die without a will. Oh, I have lots of other stories I could tell. I hope I steered you to what you can and can't do with a will. I have more there too. And if you don't have a memory like this elephant's head, well, we have 50, count them, 50 Mont guides from MSU Extension. However, at the moment, you can't access any of these. Neither can I. You may have heard MSU had a cyber attack, and things are still not back to normal. So give us some time and we will get those where you can access them. I could last week, but they kept dinging around with it. And this week, nothing. We must be patient. So don't forget, Mont guides are also available at our county and reservation extension offices. So in Yellowstone County, what you've got is Sarah Fleur, who is there in the county office. And I'd like to thank Northern Plains for the opportunity to share information about my favorite topic. And I hope you enjoy the interplay of the wildflowers. So I'll open it up to the next part on the program, and I'll be here for questions.
Oh, thank you, Marsha. That was a wonderful, and thank you for the pictures of flowers, and you've really made it clear that a will is a very personal document that deserves some time and preparation. So thank you.
You bet.
Now we will begin a brief Q&A session. You can enter questions in the chat. I see there are some already, or raise your hand, either using the Zoom function, or again, you can just physically raise your hand, and we'll alternate between the questions in the chat and those that you want to speak yourself. We won't get to everyone, and we can't answer all of the questions, and we certainly can't answer questions about unique and specific situations in your family, but we'll do our best. So a little bigger. What happens if you're single with no kids and your parents are dead? Does everything go to your siblings or nieces and nephews, the state? How would it be divided?
Yeah, that's why you need to write a will, because it's those dearly beloved brothers and sisters that are going to receive your property. And it's just like that first example I gave. If one of your brothers or sisters is deceased, it will go down to those children. So I would encourage you, if you've got a charity, or maybe you love your nieces and nephews, but in this day and age, they're making more money than we ever thought about making. And maybe you have a favorite charity that you would like to recognize. So I would encourage you to do that. Next question.
Thank you. Okay, how does a prenup intersect with a will?
Oh, that is a good question to ask, because if we've got a prenup here, he had legal advice and she had legal advice, then we've got figured out what we want to do. Then what you need to make sure is that if you agreed that you weren't going to put property in joint tenancy, etc., then stick with the prenup. You can't come in afterwards and then say, oh, I want to do this or that, because it's just going to foul. It's going to make hard feelings all the way around. So make sure your will matches up with how your property is titled and how your prenup is worded. Okay.
Thank you. How do you provide for a beloved pet? Aren't they property under Montana law?
Oh, yeah. But would you believe I have a mock guide on estate planning for pets and companion animals? And I found that Montana has a pet trust that you can set up to take care of your pet. And they're treated kind of like the separate listing of tangible personal property. There's not a title to the dog. So, you know, it's like anything else there. So you can put that in your will. But if you will email me, I can send you through another situation that Mont guide, because since you ask about pets, man, I think you'd find that one really helpful. I kind of chuckled when I had an agent ask me to do that, and I go, oh, gee. And then I read how much people spend on their pets, and you had Betty White that was going to leave millions to her pets. So yeah, I'd be glad to send that to you.
Does Montana have a threshold dollar value when a will doesn't need to go through probate?
Okay, and it's not the threshold for the will, it's the dollar amount that is subject to. So let's just take an example. If you have an estate that's less than 50,000, and maybe what you've got is savings account, checking account, and what have you, there's an affidavit for collection of personal property by affidavit. And as a survivor, you would just take that down to the bank and say, hi, I'm Susie. I'm the one that's supposed to get this CD. And the bank will have you show a photo ID, and you need to have that affidavit with you. You don't need to give them the affidavit of death, because this other affidavit takes care of that. Okay, there's another one that's called a summary administrative procedure. And that's where, you know, here's your estate and here's your debt, and there's not anything to distribute because the debts are going to take everything that's there. So we also have a mock guide on probate. And I think there's a couple of other ways that you can do that. So I would suggest, since you asked the question, email me, and I'll put my email in the chat room so that you can email me and I'll give you that. Okay.
What is the general cost for putting together a will? Does it have to be done with a lawyer?
Oh boy. I will say this. Montana law allows you to write your own will, but it must be totally in your handwriting. Now, you can type a will and it becomes a formal will. And a formal will has to have 2 witnesses. And of course, you could go out on the web and there's all these will forms and they say, oh, these are legal in Montana. Okay, there was even a guy, 3-piece suit, sitting doing an advertisement on television, and $19.90. Of course, this was a few years ago. And so I ordered it because I kept getting calls from people. What about this will? Well, fiddle-dee. It was 5 pieces of paper and a little plastic container to put it in. And in there, it had that the property would be distributed by right of representation. I took that around to our smart ag economists who are PhD people, and not one knew what right of representation means. And how many other words would be in there that we don't know what we're doing? I don't do my own plumbing. I don't do my own surgery, and I don't do my own legal work. I want somebody, if nothing else, I can be mad at them if they did it wrong. And then I'll sue them, maybe, or maybe not. We'll see. Okay.
Okay, we have another question. Are the NOLO legal help books good for Montana wills? They seem to be good on other topics.
Yeah, they really, NOLO, I can't really advertise here, but what I have found is that NOLO does a good job. They take you through some of the wording and explain what it means. They also have one on divorce, and they take you through doing a premarital agreement, which is another mock guide that I've got, and they do a good job. So even if I had a NOLO will, I'd still take it to a Montana attorney that focuses on estate planning, just to make sure. Because I thought I was a pretty hot cookie there, smart, knowing it all. And then I took it to my attorney, and she pointed out quite a few things that I had left out. So it's not a do-it-yourself thing. I wish it was. You'd save some money, of course. But something like this is your legacy. And property counts. So write a will or use these non-probate things.
Do you have suggestions for how to choose a lawyer for estate planning?
Oh, funny you should mention that. I finally, during COVID, had the opportunity to write the monk guide on selecting an attorney to write, do your estate planning, and then also to do a probate. Because every meeting I would have, people would want to know, well, what questions should I ask? And this and this and this. So all of that is combined into selecting an attorney. So email me. I'd be glad to send you that one too. It's one of my latest ones.
All right. What would be an approximate range for what the attorney would charge for a not too complicated will?
It's one of those things that you ask the attorney when you go in, are they charging by a will, or are they charging for the hours that it takes to get the will done? And you see, the thing is, with this selecting an attorney, one of the things I put in there is we have a monk guide getting started with estate planning. And in that, I list all the things, or many of the things the attorney will need to know. Well, there is no sense going to an attorney, sitting down with dollar signs going, and having him or her tell you that. This monk guide tells you that, so you can have a more productive session with the attorney. So I have heard all the way from $5,000 if you're going to have a testamentary trust or a revocable living trust, all the way down to $800. And I'm sure there's some out there. Sometimes attorneys will do them for less because they want to get you to feel comfortable with them. And maybe if they, you like them, you'll go back to them for updating and what have you. And they do need to be updated. We had a change in law about 15 years ago, and the attorneys were writing people saying, hey, get in here, we need to make some changes. And people said, he's just after more money. Wrong. There were some significant changes and their wills needed to be changed. So the attorney was doing everybody a favor by contacting the clients and say, come in here, we need to make some revisions.
Okay. Are there no more questions in the chat? How about anybody raising their hand?
These are not raise your hand people, I can tell.
No.
But I love to see the smiles.
I can't see everyone. Can you folks?
Yeah,
There's nobody with their hand raised. Nobody has more questions in the chat.
all right.
Oh, well, we have one here. I can't see who it is. Who can?
It's Barbara.
Barbara, go ahead.
So all of these pamphlets that you are talking about they are available at the extension office here in Billings.
Yes, they would be. Our communication services people have sent out a list of all of our Mont guides. The trouble is they gave us the list with just the numbers, not the title. So if you could just be patient for a bit, or give a call to Sarah there at the extension office in Billings and just say, do you by chance have any? Because some of the counties keep like 50 copies of every one. And when somebody comes in, they can give it to them. Well, now because computers and storage problems, we just say, oh, come in and we'll print it off for you. And normally we've, in my 46 years, this is the first time that we have not been able to access what we have available. In the old days, they would have been printed and we just be able to mail them out to you. But we can still mail them out. I just need to know which one you want. And then I just don't do the number. I just send the title of the publication. So selecting attorney, getting started, the pets. We even have an order form on obviously you have access to a computer. There's an order form in there. If you go to Marsha Goetting and put order form in there, and you could check the ones you want, send it to my secretary, and she'll see that they're printed off for you. Thank you, Barbara, for the question.
Thank you, Barbara. Lori, we see your hand. We have a question from the chat and then we'll call on you. What does probate cost?
Oh, you're going to love this. It used to be a percentage, okay. Personal representative, 3% of the first 40,000, 2% in excess of that. And then the attorney got 1 1/2 times. As of October of 21, here is what the fee is. It must be reasonable.
Glad to hear it. Lori, Lori, you had a question.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Marsha, for this good information. I was just I was wondering about leaving money or like for a child's education, setting it up so that, maybe it's conditional on them going to college, or how does that work if you want to leave something to a child for a particular purpose, or
Okay. Well, one of the things that you could think about and explore is a testamentary trust. And guess who has a Mont guide on that one? Okay, so what you're doing is you're saying, I'm putting as much as you want to in there. You can put your life insurance, your savings, your checking, you put them in this big pile that's called the trust upon your death. And then you have a trust, a document or an agreement. And in that you indicate this is to be used for my children's health, education, maintenance, and support. And that might be all you say. Or you could be like one grandfather who had dead hand control, we call him, because he had 90 pages. And the kid had to go to this school, they had to do this, this, and this. And see, you're going to need a trustee for that trust. And that's somebody that's going to be that you trust a lot. And you need to have the discussion with the trustee. Here comes my nephew, Christopher. And Christopher says, I would like to have some money to go to Europe. I think it would be so educational. And your trustee is going to have to decide, is that health, maintenance, education, support? So you decide. And, and you got to decide how specific you want to be. I mean, if you require a college education, well, you say that. If you're thinking there's other forms of education that the person, plumbers right now are making more than some of our faculty, well, yeah, some of those things are fine. So it needs to be thought through, and there are books out there that have examples of how you do the trust. I've got one on testamentary trusts. I've got one on revocable living trusts. And revocable living trust is another way. It's just you're making the decision now to put everything into the name of the trust. And then you'll probably control it for a while. But then after you die, then the trustee takes over. So it's very possible for you to prepare for those children. And I commend you for thinking about that, because parents need to be farsighted.
Thank you.
Okay, and our last question is from Patty.
Hi, Patty.
You're muted, Pat. There you go.
Oh, I wanted your email, but, and I got it. But, if you have, you set aside the 529 money for, nephews and nieces. So should that be, listed separately, or, maybe that money for college, they'll already be out of college by the time we die, or, is that in that one of those testimonial trusts, or what would you say
No,
about that?
the 529 is a separate plan by itself. And when you establish that, you had the opportunity to name beneficiaries or who it was established for. And then there's some rules about, well, if this person doesn't use it, it can go to the next person. And so you need to look at the small print in the 529 that you have. Is it Montana's 529 or is it one of the other states?
Mhm.
So pull out the papers and take a look and see what they say is going to be done with it if this child doesn't use it, because there's other ways.
Okay. And if the, if we die and the kid is still going to school, will that be honored?
Oh, yeah.
Or-
Yeah,
Yeah.
it becomes a part of your estate that passes to that individual, but he can't just take it and run and say, oh, I've always wanted to buy a Corvette.
Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm-mm.
Thanks.
You bet, Patty.
Oh, and thank you so much, Marsha, for, and thank you to everyone for coming tonight. The time has flown by as we expected. So I want to thank our speakers, Mary Jo Knights and Marsha Goetting. And please feel free to email us with any additional questions, and make sure to fill out the evaluation form that will be on the screen. And you also get an email containing a link to that survey. We really would value your observations about this experiment, this webinar, because we are planning to have some more. There is some exciting news we want to close with. The Montana Endowment Tax Credit has been made permanent, and the amount of the credit has doubled. And if you'd like to learn more, please stay tuned for our next webinar coming before the end of this year. We have some excellent presenters lined up to provide all of the details about that. So you can look forward to that. And also we want to hear about anything else that, any other questions you have or other topics that you'd like to hear about. So Effie is giving you an evaluation form in the chat. And we just want to thank you all for coming. This has been wonderful. And thank you again, Marsha and Mary Jo.
You bet.